Welcome, everyone. My name is Kim Terrell, and I'm the Environment Program Director at NCSL. I'll be moderating today's presentation. First, I'd like to start just by thanking everybody for being here. I know everyone is extremely busy, so we appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend a little bit of time with us and learn more about what the Environment Program at NCSL does. So I'm going to jump in and just do a little bit of housekeeping. So for those of you who are new to the platform, to the right of the video player, you'll see a note tab. You'll note the tabs that say chat and Q&A. If you want to ask our team a question, please use the Q&A tab. And if you see a question you like, you can upvote that question using the up arrow. Be sure to write your full name and state in the nickname box when prompted in chat. And we encourage everyone to put questions in the Q&A box as you think of them. We're going to wait and take questions at the end, but certainly if you think of a question, just go ahead and type it in. You can also expand your video player to full screen by clicking on the arrows at the bottom right of the window player. You'll find the bios for our team and some resources that we've put together at the bottom of the screen. If your schedule prevents you from sticking with us for the full session, your registration includes access to all the session recordings until March 26th. If for some reason you need technical help, at any point during the presentation, just use the help button at the bottom right of the page. So I would like to kick us off with a poll question. So this is poll number 1. So broadly speaking, what environmental issues do you foresee being priorities in your state for the coming year? So I'll give everybody a second to answer that poll question. And again, these are high level categories. We understand that not everything is on there, but just thought it might be helpful to get a sense from folks what your priorities are going to be. Okay, great. Thanks so much. It's great to see everyone's responses. I will just do a quick overview of kind of what we're going to cover today. Ultimately, we hope to just give you all a good sense of some of the services and resources that we offer, as well as some of the different policy areas that we cover, which a lot of you will be working on probably in the coming session. So just as a quick reminder, ask questions as you think of them and type them in the Q&A box. So first, I'd like to introduce our team. From our Denver office, we have myself, Kim Terrell, Program Director, Mindy Bridges, Shelley Oren, and Jennifer Schultz. And then from our DC office, we have Kristen Hildreth. And for those of you who don't know, actually Denver is our headquarters. So the majority of our staff is in Denver, and then we have a smaller staff in DC. And just as a reminder, you can click on, you can access everyone's bio by clicking on their name in the screen below. And you're going to hear from everybody in just a bit. So hopefully most of you have received some introductory information from NCSL, and hopefully you've turned into some of our other Policy 101 sessions. And you're starting to get a little bit of a sense of what NCSL does and kind of who we are. And I know it's a lot to take in, but ultimately I think as you get to know us, you'll discover that we have a vast portfolio of resources and services. And we really encourage you all to take advantage of that. So looking specifically at the environment program, our team actively tracks over 40 environment and environmental health issues. And we maintain the results of those issues in 2 online searchable databases. The databases are searchable by keyword, state, year, etc. And I definitely encourage everybody to bookmark the databases because they're a great first stop when you're doing some policy research. But clearly, if you don't find what you're looking for, we encourage you to pick up the phone or send us an email at any time, and we're happy to do a custom research request for you. We also know that sometimes you might be looking for more in-depth information on a certain topic. So throughout the year, we push out information through newsletters, bulletins, policy briefs, podcasts, magazine articles, and reports. There's lots of other ways that you can engage with NCSL. We have task forces and committees. We have webinars throughout the year. We also provide expert testimony and technical assistance. And I'm sure, as most of you are probably aware of, we host a lot of meetings. Obviously, they've been virtual the past year, but when we get back to normal, we host a lot of in-person meetings. So we hope you guys will take advantage of those as well. So I thought I'd highlight some of our recent publications just to give you a sense of some of the topics that we cover. I recently wrote a piece for our state legislature's magazine on the disposal challenges related to lithium-ion batteries and some new technologies and best practices that can reduce environmental impacts and protect worker safety. Jen wrote a legis brief on recycling, which she'll touch on later. And Shelley wrote a blog on murder hornets, which I'm sure most of you have heard of and have been dying to learn more about. So I suggest that you check out Shelley's blog. The one thing that you can consistently count on from NCSL is that our information will be nonpartisan and fact-based. So this will allow you to move forward confidently knowing that you have solid information. So I thought I'd share just a few interesting stats from our team. In 2020, states and territories introduced over 6,000 bills related to environment and environmental health issue. Our team fulfilled over 66 custom research requests, provided testimony and technical assistance to states on issues ranging from funding to state parks to emergency powers in the time of disaster. Each year, we reach thousands of legislators and legislative staff through our meetings and webinars, and the publications that we mentioned earlier reach tens of thousands of readers each month. So in simplest terms, the environment program covers everything related to air, land, and water, or in keeping with the A to Z theme, auto emissions to zebra mussels. And through an environmental health lens, we explore the connection between the environment and people. So I thought I'd just share with you some of the trends that we're seeing in 2021. And again, this is not an all-inclusive list. This is just a few of the topics that we kind of see rising to the top. PFAS is certainly an issue in many states. Waste and recycling issues, environmental justice, resiliency, which can cover, infrastructure, grid resiliency, which, obviously we've been hearing a lot about, and water resource management, water quality, water quantity issues. And our policy experts will go into greater detail on some of these topics later on today. Now I would like to tee up another poll question. So this is poll number 2. What types of disasters are you most concerned about in your state? So again, we kept these pretty broad: flooding, high wind events such as tornadoes and hurricanes, earthquakes, and wildfires. So I'll give everybody a second to take that poll. Yeah, so not surprising, we see that flooding is a major issue. And I think what's interesting about flooding is it seems to be something that really touches every state. And I think wildfires is also interesting simply because, wildfires used to be primarily associated with the West, but, obviously last year was a horrible wildfire season, but, increasingly we're seeing wildfires throughout the country. So, as I'm sure most of you are all too aware, whether it's flooding, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, etc., um, natural disasters are becoming more frequent, more damaging, and costlier. 2017 was the costliest hurricane season on record, with damages totaling more than $250 billion. The wildfires that I mentioned last year alone had damages of over $19 billion. And over the last 5 years, disaster damages have exceeded over $500 billion. Given the increasing fiscal, economic, and social impacts of disasters, states are increasingly taking steps to invest in mitigation and resilience measures in an effort to help their communities respond and recover more quickly. So I think a really interesting factoid is that for every dollar invested in mitigation, $6 is saved. Since 2018, states have introduced more than 1,700 bills related to disasters, covering everything from floodwater diversion systems to beefing up their building codes. So as you will see in the graph that's on the screen right now, 13 states, including Alaska, Colorado, Mississippi, and South Carolina, which are highlighted in orange, have established state resiliency offices or similar state-led programs. Other states, such as Florida, Rhode Island, and Virginia, which are highlighted in green, have established a state resiliency officer position, which is tasked with implementing resiliency efforts. Other states like Maine, Nevada, and Washington, which are highlighted in dark blue, have created resiliency commissions, task forces, or working groups. So funding from the federal government to support states comes from a number of agencies, including FEMA, EPA, HUD, and others. So as you all start working on these issues, I would definitely encourage you to work closely with your state agencies to explore all the different funding streams that might be able to support your communities. In 2019, NCSL launched a public-private partnership dedicated to exploring how states can better weather disasters. For the past year and a half, legislators from across the country have gathered to share information, best practices, meet with experts and authorities, and then go back to their respective states and introduce legislation that will better prepare them for future disasters. Last month, we released a comprehensive report on the work of the partnership, which can be found on our website and is also listed below in the resource section. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mindy Bridges to discuss some of our other policy work.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Like Kim mentioned, NCSL's environmental policy staff cover a wide range of issues, and today I'm just going to highlight a couple of examples related to both water policy and agriculture, two broad policy areas that I work on at NCSL. Again, some of these issues can be pretty state or regionally specific, and we're just touching the tip of the metaphorical iceberg today. So please reach out either today through the chat box and the Q&A function or beyond today's session with questions and needs you might have. So diving into the wide world of water policy, in the face of the current pandemic, what was one of the first actions that you as an individual could take? Wash your hands, right? And the pandemic has likely made us more aware of the water coming through the tap and the workers who support these systems. And I just want to mention, our thoughts are with everyone in Texas today as well, and the water issues they're facing too. So as you might have heard from my colleagues last week in the session on energy policy, COVID has highlighted the importance of essential workers, including water and wastewater workers, and has prompted state action to halt utility shutoffs. While the executive branch has been leading a lot of these actions, state legislatures also have an opportunity to look more closely at these policy approaches. For example, Michigan just enacted the Water Shutoff Restoration Act in December, and this law prohibits public water suppliers from shutting off water services due to non-payment. We'll likely see a continued interest in drinking water, water rates and affordability, water equity, and other related concerns that your constituents might have. This slide just highlights a few of the broad topics beyond COVID that fall under water policy: drinking water, resource management, conservation and efficiency, and of course, funding. Now, while I often hear water talked about as either a quantity approach or a quality approach, there's increasing efforts to look at an integrated water management approach, which can bring all these topics together in a single perspective or approach that looks at a variety of users and stakeholders related to water resources. So next, I'll discuss broadly how states are approaching water resource management, both within and beyond their state borders. So on this next slide, taking a step back for a look at water policy more broadly, it's important to note the water rights frameworks across the country, which all these approaches,
Sorry.
Slide. So this map demonstrates surface water frameworks. Very broadly speaking, riparian water rights are land-based. So in other words, who has direct access to the river flowing by your property or flowing through your property is the riparian water doctrine. And prior appropriation water rights are use-based. So in the West, you might have heard of the phrase first in time, first in right. So the first to withdraw water has senior water rights, regardless of if they're upstream or downstream from other users. And this just makes it challenging to look at some of these water issues across all 50 states, but we do our best when working with all of you. I'd also note that groundwater would be an entirely separate layer on this map. And states are also looking at a variety of ways to manage groundwater withdrawals, such as natural resource districts in Nebraska or management districts formed by local residents in Kansas. And states are increasingly also looking at both surface water and groundwater allocations together. So again, this is all part of that integrated water resource management approach I mentioned earlier, and every state's looking to manage their water resources to the best of their abilities. So as you'll see on the next slide, there's some similarities and also differences among states when it comes to state water planning. These state water plans bring multiple stakeholders and interests together and address a range of challenges, from contaminants to aging infrastructure and to natural disaster planning. I'm curious if any of you know if your state has a water plan and if you're aware of some of the interesting history of the plan's development. Feel free to share any knowledge or insights you might have in the chat box. I'm curious to hear from all of you. As you see here on the slide, Colorado and South Carolina may be in different geographic regions of the country, but they have similarities across state water planning efforts. For example, both states are using watersheds or basins for more focused planning efforts and stakeholder engagement that's directly tied to the landscape. There doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all approach across all 50 states or even within the same state. So these basins can really be an effective way to address local interests and needs. And of course, there's always a role for the state legislature. In Colorado, a 2013 executive order led to the creation of the first state water plan in 2015. Sounds pretty recent, right? And the Colorado General Assembly has been actively engaged throughout the process of planning and implementation for the plan, primarily through the Interim Water Resources Review Committee. So as we're seeing a variety of these approaches in Colorado and South Carolina, we're seeing them in other states too. And these proactive statewide efforts often take into account future needs assessments and again, balance those state and local concerns. So just a few quick examples outside of Colorado and South Carolina. In 2019, Maine established a water resource planning committee. Utah created the Watershed Council Act in 2020, which provides for local watershed councils. And just a few key takeaways. Now, while each state has its own unique history for its state planning efforts, there's some commonalities. States are looking at both surface and groundwater. They're organizing within the state with basins and watersheds, and they're bringing together a wide range of users and taking into consideration other concerns like population growth and drought. And of course, legislative involvement is key. So as you see on this slide, these state planning efforts are also situated in a broader context. You don't have to have a geology degree or a master's in hydrology to know that water doesn't follow state boundaries. There's just a few quick examples on this slide with the Colorado River, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Great Lakes, where states are working together to address these important bodies of water. Now, something that's similar among all these bodies of water is the importance of agricultural producers. So that brings us to our next topic, agriculture. We aren't holding a separate Policy 101 session on agriculture, and we certainly could hold one on any of these topics. So we just want to take a few minutes today to highlight some policy topics at the intersection of environment and agriculture, including soil health, pollinators, and pesticides. So I'll ask you on the next slide. What is a healthy soil? What does it feel like? What does it look like? What does it smell like? I'm not sure we have any farmers in the audience today, but maybe you picked up gardening as a hobby during this past summer. Healthy soils can play a crucial role in positively impacting water quality, reducing the need for chemical inputs, and also increasing carbon in the soil. As you'll see on the next slide, in recent years, there's been an increase in state and federal support for the development of healthy soils, and this can really be a win-win for both farmers and the environment. We had excellent presentations and discussions at our Ag Task Force meeting in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. One of our task force members had his farm manager present alongside a USDA representative, and we learned about the best practices that farmers are taking today and the USDA programs that support the implementation. As part of these discussions, another legislator from Iowa shared how the perspectives had changed since her dad had farmed. It used to be all about clean rows, and now we've moved to tillage and cover crops. So alongside all the support from the federal government, states are also taking an active role in supporting and encouraging these approaches among their agricultural producers. So I've just highlighted a few examples of recent legislation here. There's many more examples beyond this. New Mexico just created a healthy soil program and a corresponding grant program. Nebraska created the Healthy Soils Task Force, and Washington just established the Sustainable Farms and Fields Grant Program. So again, just a few quick examples on how farmers are working together to support the environment and make good decisions for their farms as well. So next, I will turn it over to Shelley Oren to talk about pollinators and pesticides.
Thanks, Mindy. So bees may be the first thing that comes to mind when we think about pollinators, but pollinators can include ants, bats, butterflies, and other insects. Because pollinators play a key role in supporting agriculture and the national economy, states have enacted a range of bills to protect them. In 2020, at least 30 states considered over 150 bills related to pollinators. Many of these bills relate to insecticides, habitat protection, and increasing public awareness about the importance of pollinators. Pollinator populations have been declining in recent years, and exposure to pesticides is one factor that may be contributing to this decline. In recent years, states have considered bills to shield pollinators from the effects of pesticides by restricting the use of chemicals like neonicotinoids, which are a class of pesticides that are believed to be particularly harmful. States have also focused on enacting legislation to protect and restore habitats to support pollinator populations. Some of these efforts have focused on encouraging the use of native plants, protecting pollinator pathways, or areas that pollinators use to move between habitats, and supporting research initiatives to identify pollinator habitats so that they can be restored and protected. We've also seen states take steps to increase public awareness of the importance of protecting pollinators by passing legislation to support education and outreach programs, as well as initiatives to establish pollinator weeks to increase awareness of pollinating insects. As you'll see on the next slide, states have taken action to develop regulations for pesticides that are stricter than the regulations set by EPA. In 2020, at least 34 states considered nearly 200 bills with language related to pesticides. Many of these bills are aimed at restricting the use of certain pesticides, establishing labeling, sale, and notification requirements, and strengthening safety protocols for pesticide application to protect human health and the environment. As I mentioned, states have been restricting the use of insecticides like neonicotinoids to protect pollinator populations, and states have also been looking at restricting the use of herbicides like glyphosate, specifically with regards to its use near school sites. And states have looked to increase safety requirements surrounding pesticide application. Some states have established notification requirements when pesticides are going to be applied near places like residential properties and schools. Other states have developed education programs for pesticide applicators. In addition to water and agriculture, our team covers legislation related to environmental cleanup, as well as toxics like PFAS and lead. We cover topics related to state environmental cleanup activities, such as oil spills, hazardous waste releases, Superfund sites, and brownfields. States are interested in environmental cleanup, not only to protect human health and the environment, but also because there are economic benefits associated with cleanup activities and the redevelopment of contaminated sites. States throughout the country are addressing environmental cleanup. In 2020, states considered over 150 bills related to environmental cleanup topics. For example, states enacted legislation to address oil spills and the discharge of hazardous waste, such as by increasing penalties for knowingly causing a spill or failing to begin cleanup. States are also looking at ways to support the cleanup and redevelopment of brownfields, such as through revolving loan funds. On the next slide, I'll talk about a growing issue area, PFAS. There are some toxics-related policy issues that states are needing to take the lead on when the federal government hasn't provided clear or specific direction. One example is PFAS. So what are PFAS? PFAS are a group of human-made chemicals not found naturally in the environment that have emerged as an issue of increasing interest to state legislatures and the federal government because they've been linked to adverse health effects. PFAS are found in a wide range of products used daily. You may have interacted with PFAS in items like cookware, rain jackets, or pizza boxes, where they're used because they repel dirt, water, and grease. The chemicals have also been widely used for firefighting activities, including at military bases and airports. In 2020, states considered over 100 bills with language on PFAS. An increased number of states are expected to consider PFAS-related bills in 2021. So what actions have states taken to address PFAS? States have established or proposed health guidelines or maximum contaminant levels for PFAS in drinking water and groundwater. For example, in 2020, New Hampshire adopted an MCL for certain PFAS chemicals in drinking water. States have also enacted legislation to ban the use of firefighting foams containing the chemicals. Last year, Michigan, for example, prohibited the use of firefighting foam containing PFAS in firefighting training. Additionally, states have allocated funds for cleanup and remediation at sites contaminated by PFAS, including the monitoring and cleaning up of drinking water and groundwater, and administering programs to collect and dispose of firefighter foam. States have also looked to ban the chemicals in food packaging, furniture, cosmetics, and children's products. Notably, Washington has prohibited PFAS in food packaging by 2022 if safer alternatives are identified. For more information, I encourage you to check out our PFAS webpage and our upcoming Legis brief on this topic. Next, I'll turn it over to Jen to discuss lead.
Thanks, Shelley. As we know, lead poses a real danger to human health, especially in children. In the past, all kinds of products were made with lead: cosmetics, paint, solder for pipes, the pipes themselves, and stained glass, just to name a few. And many of these products are still around, which extends the problem for governments at all levels. State action is focused broadly on lead in homes, lead in schools, lead in the water, and compensation and services for those exposed. Some recent legislation: Maine set a goal to eradicate childhood lead poisoning by 2030. Virginia is requiring school boards to notify parents if testing levels are too high. Minnesota is helping homeowners replace the privately owned portion of lead service lines with loan forgiveness and grants. And Delaware prohibited lead paint on outdoor structures like bridges, water towers, and playground equipment. I should also add that in December of 2020, the EPA updated its lead and copper rule. That's the first update since 1991. This will have far-reaching effects on states, which my colleague Kristen will talk more about soon. So another area where we can expect a lot of legislative activity is waste, specifically recycling markets, reduction of plastics, and food waste. Let's start with recycling. It may not be something we think about too often. You toss a bottle or can in the bin and move on. But what happens after has only become more complicated in the past couple years. Aside from the environmental benefits, recycling has a huge economic impact in the US to the tune of 700,000 jobs, 37 billion in wages, and 7 billion in tax revenues each year. Recycling as a whole has increased dramatically since the 1960s, but some materials are recycled more than others, and numbers are still pretty low depending where you live. In 2017, China stopped accepting most recyclables from the US because what we were sending them, different materials all mixed together, wasn't meeting the standard. It was contaminated. China was a huge market, and that policy has left our localities and recyclers scrambling. Combine that with the pandemic, dated infrastructure, products that weren't designed for recycling, and confusion about what can and can't be recycled in the first place, and you have quite the set of challenges. But states have stepped up. Last year, at least 22 considered bills to better understand, invest in, and improve on recycling. There were a lot of bills in 2019 as well, with at least 80 enacted. Here are some examples. New Hampshire and Illinois created legislative committees. Washington and California created recycling development centers to help expand domestic markets. Michigan increased funding to recycling programs from 2 million to 15 million each year. Texas and many other states are also working on public education campaigns. I encourage you to check out Michigan's Recycling Raccoon Squad if you're interested. For more information, I posted a link in the resources tab for a legis brief we published in November. Waste reduction on the next slide is also a popular topic, and plastic is the #1 target for those efforts. State legislatures are considering hundreds of bills each year on plastic, and it's not just bags anymore. Straws, styrofoam, and other packaging are also involved. Before 2019, California and Hawaii were the only states that had banned plastic bags statewide. Today, that number is 10, and several of those states have also curtailed the use of polystyrene takeout containers and provide straws only if a customer requests one. I should note that none of the laws that I've mentioned 100% ban any of these products. There are a number of exceptions based on the exact type of product, the type of store, and sometimes the customer. Another important distinction to make is that while 10 states ban plastic bags, 18 have imposed a ban on bans, so to speak, preempting local action. For more information, we have a webpage on this topic, as well as a webinar recording from 2019, where our speakers represented opposing sides of the plastic debate. In addition to plastic, food is another top focus for waste reduction. Between 30 and 40% of food produced in the US goes uneaten. This equates to lost resources, lost landfill space, and more methane produced, and less food for families in need. Here's a snapshot of recent action. Washington has set a goal to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. 6 states, the newest being Maryland, have passed organic waste bans, which prohibit large generators of food waste from sending that food to landfills. Instead, they must donate it, compost it, or turn it into biogas energy. A few years ago, the Vermont Food Bank reported food donations up 40% as a result of this. And a 2016 Massachusetts study found that their organic waste ban generated $175 million in economic activity and created more than 900 jobs. In addition, at least 10 states provide a tax incentive to encourage food donations, in addition to what is provided federally. And all states protect food banks and other organizations from liability due to the quality of donated food, though to varying degrees. At the high end of the spectrum, California and Massachusetts protect the donation of food that has passed its expiration date. Because we know that the labels on food products, the sell by, use by, best by, enjoy by, are generally indicators of quality and not safety. Land use is the last topic in our state policy review for today, specifically state parks and outdoor recreation. The outdoors, as we know, have become kind of a safe haven throughout the pandemic, and I think it's safe to say we will see more legislative action to fund and protect these spaces. One of the most interesting trends has been the creation of state offices of outdoor recreation. The offices are charged with supporting and fostering an outdoor recreation economy that nationally accounts for 2.1% of GDP. It used to be that most of these offices were found in the West, but as you can see on the slide, they exist in every region now. Moving to state parks, legislation falls into a number of categories, whether it's offering discounted admission to veterans, adding electric vehicle charging stations, or creating special programs for underserved populations. States are also experimenting with different funding mechanisms for parks. It could be revenue from oil and gas leases, the sale of outdoor equipment, a tax on hotel stays, or parking fees at popular sites like Niagara Falls, which, fun fact, happens to be the first state park in the nation. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Kristen Hildreth, for a federal review.
Thanks, Jen. I'm Kristen Hildreth, and I cover federal policy for NCSL. I'm very federal environmental policy. We have a number of staff in the DC office that cover a variety of issues. Very briefly, four of the major federal agencies in the environmental arena include the Environmental Protection Agency, which is charged with ensuring clean air, land, and water via the implementation of regulations and national standards, enforcement of those standards, and providing grants to states and local governments. It has the responsibility of maintaining and enforcing national standards under a variety of environmental laws in consultation with state, tribal, and local governments, and delegates some permitting, monitoring, and enforcement responsibility to states and tribes. The Department of Interior is charged with conservation and management of most federal lands and the nation's natural resources. And for example, the Bureau of Land Management and the National Park Service both fall under the Department of Interior. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is primarily responsible for overseeing farming, ranching, rural development, forestry, and regulating aspects of food safety and quality, also conducts research on a variety of agricultural climate-related issues and has several conservation programs to aid agricultural producers in improving their environmental performance with respect to soil, water, and air quality, as well as wildlife habitat and greenhouse gas emissions. Last but not least, the Department of Energy is split into two parts: nuclear weapons on one side and energy research on the other. That research arm focuses on other energy-related functions such as conservation, emergency energy preparedness, energy supply, and research and development. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which if you tuned in to the Energy Policy 101, you may have heard a little bit about, is an independent agency within DOE, which plays a high-level role in interstate electricity markets and is responsible for overseeing that interstate transmission of electricity, natural gas, and oil, and has jurisdiction over pipeline and hydropower project siting and approvals. I mentioned FERC. Is just recently the commission denied several construction requests citing environmental justice concerns, and the new commissioner, Richard Glick, believes that FERC should more seriously review environmental justice impacts and assess greenhouse gas emissions when approving infrastructure moving forward. So I understand that that was a very quick and brief 101 on these federal agencies that have a role in environmental policy, but if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. The next slide illustrates the regions which EPA is split into. Kim, as EPA is the primary environmental agency, I just wanted to quickly point out its regional offices. If you have access to the chat, feel free to go ahead and put in what region your state falls in. Perhaps you can connect with another member that's listening today. So now that we've quickly touched on the relevant federal agencies, I'm going to take a quick look at Congress and the appropriate committees of jurisdiction when discussing environmental policy matters. Environmental policy spans the gamut, from science and technology to public lands and renewable resources to conservation and drinking clean water. It's a bunch, and as such, there's a number of committees on the Hill which concern themselves with environmental policy. I've listed them out here and won't delve into them due to our time constraints today, but if you have any questions on the committees, what areas of jurisdiction they actually cover, feel free to reach out. So in addition to that quick congressional and general federal agency overview, the federal government itself has taken action on several of the issues my colleagues mentioned previously, from executive orders, which direct the federal government to consider climate change and federal infrastructure investment and expand environmental justice priorities, in addition to including a moratorium on new oil and gas leases on federal lands and offshore waters, to congressional action, which we anticipate to range from funding drinking and clean water programs to climate resilience and mitigation, and from carbon sequestration in the agricultural sector to clean energy initiatives. The federal government has certainly been active thus far in 2021, and we anticipate environmental related policy actions to only increase. Again, given that timing, I won't go super in depth, but the federal government has been super active on a couple of those key items my colleagues mentioned, including PFAS, the lead and copper rule, and outdoor recreation. On the PFAS front, as Shelley mentioned, states are really starting to take action as there's historically been a lack of federal action. Right now, EPA is moving forward in the process to develop a national drinking water regulation under the Safe Drinking Water Act for PFOS and PFOA. On the lead front, as Jen mentioned, with the finalization of the lead and copper rule revisions this past December, a new publicly available lead service line inventory is created, and a requirement is imposed, an unfunded mandate, if you will, on all states to require water systems to take drinking water samples at 20% of both elementary schools and childcare facilities, as well as once every 5 years at secondary schools. And on the outdoor recreation and conservation front, the Great American Outdoors Act, which passed in 2020, fully and permanently funded the Land and Water Conservation Fund at its authorized amount of $900 million, which will be the first time it has received that authorized amount since 1964. Given that increase, it's likely your state is going to receive roughly a 50% increase in funding from previous years to acquire and develop public parks, lands, other outdoor recreation sites, and conservation initiatives. But given the breadth of environmental policy, there's a number of additional environmental actions that the federal government is taking and working on that I did not mention here. So if you're curious about the actions the federal government is taking currently, please don't hesitate to reach out or follow NCSL's Federal Communications, Capital to Capital, or the Natural Resources and Infrastructure Committee newsletter. And Kim, I'll turn it back on over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Kristen. So I know that was a lot of information for you all to take in. Again, we definitely encourage you to stay connected with NCSL. We do have a lot of resources. So as we mentioned earlier, we host a lot of meetings. So two of the biggest are the annual legislative summit, which typically takes place in August. So last year, what we ended up doing, again, because of COVID, we basically had what we call a base camp. So it was a series of online sessions that we hosted over the course of several days. And I do think that it was a great success. And, I think a good way to think about Legislative Summit is it's a little bit like, drinking from a fire hose, but it's policy 101 on every topic you could imagine. So what we're planning to do this year, again, I think due to some COVID restrictions, is we're probably going to do another version of base camp. but then we're hoping to actually have an in-person summit later on in the year, probably in the fall. So definitely just, stay in touch and kind of, keep your eyes and ears open to that. And then we also hold a Capitol Forum, which is usually in December, which is a much smaller event. But again, it's a great way for you all to connect with your colleagues from around the country and just learn about lots of different policy topics. We also offer, as we kind of mentioned earlier, some standing committees, which would allow you all as legislators and staff to benefit from the experience of other states in kind of shaping public policy. So if you are a part of one of these standing committees, you get to work with NCSL to develop policy directives and resolution on state and federal issues, which helps guide NCSL's lobbying efforts in Washington, D.C. So if that's something you think you might be interested in, definitely reach out to Kristen or Jen, and they can provide information on the Natural Resources and Infrastructure Committee, which covers energy, environment, transportation, and ag issues. We also offer several task forces, and I know it's hard to keep everything straight, but I think the two task forces that are most relevant to the environment program are the Agriculture Task Force and the Energy Supply Task Force. So again, if you're interested in those, don't hesitate to reach out. Also, as I discussed a little bit earlier, we are still having our disaster public-private partnership, which we, let's see, I think it started in 2019 and it got delayed a little bit again due to COVID. So that group of legislators is still meeting. And I definitely encourage you to check out the report that we just published on our website. I think it's a great resource for those of you who, are working on natural disasters, and clearly disasters is a topic, as we're seeing from what's happening in Texas. It's not just limited to flooding and wildfires. So it's something that really impacts every state. So again, I just wanted to remind everybody that we do have emails to our team, which you can access in the screen below. And I guess we'll just open up the floor to any questions. So do we have any questions in the chat right now? So let's see, how are states responding to disasters? What has been the mitigation focus? So I think that's a really good question. Obviously, depending on the disaster type, I think we've seen a variety of responses. I think a couple of the most common responses are building codes. So there's a couple of different kind of building code protocols, if you will. So different states adopt different building codes. But I think more and more states are starting to look at what they can do to enhance their building code. So I think Florida is a really good example. So when Hurricane Michael hit, which, gosh, I can't even remember if that was early 2000s. Anyway, the state of Florida decided after that hurricane, which was devastating for the state, they decided to look at their building codes again and just kind of see if there's any way that they could enhance those building codes. And I think it's really interesting that, when all the hurricanes hit in 2017, obviously they were devastating for the state of Florida, but when you look at the infrastructure that was built after they enhanced their building codes, that infrastructure definitely held up better than infrastructure that was built prior to them enhancing their building codes. I would say another thing that we've seen a lot of states do is invest in what you might call green infrastructure. So that could be, enhancing berms. That could be actually creating, it sounds crazy, but creating parks that can actually flood and take on floodwaters in the event of a flood. But then, when there's no flooding, it's just a beautiful park. So I think there's lots of innovation and we're just seeing some really great things from states. And I think when you look at wildfires, there's a variety of tactics, I think, in terms of, obviously, clearing, dead brush and things like that, clearing dead trees, which we see a lot of in Colorado. You're also starting to see more and more of the utilities kind of step up. If you look at California in particular, I think with Pacific Gas and Electric, they're really trying to step up the game, and they realize that they have an important role to play in disasters. So I think that that's going to be something that we're going to see more and more of. So any other questions? Oh, I see a question on plastic bag bans. So Jen, I guess this one is for you. Just curious, like what was the first, and I don't know if you know this, but what was the first state to enact like a plastic bag ban?
Sure. Well, the first city was San Francisco in 2007, I believe. And then the first statewide ban was California, although it said that Hawaii has a de facto ban because all of their most populous counties had adopted their own ordinances to restrict plastic bags before that. And then the issue in California went to the court or to the voters, and then who upheld the ban. And so that went into effect several years ago, 2015, roughly.
Great. And I think staying on plastic bans, there's another question about the impact of COVID on plastic bag bans and fees.
Sure. So a lot of the states and localities put a pause on plastic bag bans, especially those that were set to go into effect in 2020, because as I mentioned, a number of states took this action in 2019. So it would have gone into effect in 2020. The reason being that is that it's thought to be safer to use plastic and paper bags than to have cashiers. I mean, as we all, I think, have experienced, filling consumers reusable bags at the counter. Plus, it might not seem like the time to start charging fees for bags. But a lot of those pauses have been lifted now, like in California, for example. And then I know that Delaware just had its ban go into effect January 1st. And there are other examples, but I mean, certainly demand for plastic has probably increased during COVID overall, since PPE is made from plastic, takeout containers, etc. So that's something I think in the coming legislative session and in the future that will be, the impacts of that will be addressed. Sure.
Terrific. Thanks, Jen. So any other questions for our team of policy experts today? Well, I guess seeing none, again, thank you so much to everybody who tuned in today. We hope this was helpful. Again, we know it was a lot of information, but I think, again, like ultimately, we all just want you to know that we're here as a resource for you. So, anytime you have a question about anything related to the environment, don't hesitate to reach out to us by email, pick up the phone, whatever, we're always here for you. Hang on one second. It looks like we do have another question coming in. So let me just backtrack to that super quick. So let's see. So we received a question about a quarry that creates pollution in the local community. So definitely looking for some resources. So yeah, we are absolutely happy to share some resources on that topic. It is a question that we've had come up from time to time. And So quarries, obviously quarries can vary by state, and obviously the geography of the state. So we would be happy to share information on that topic. So we will reach out to you directly. Okay, let's see. Here's another question. Are we seeing policy changes with regards to where development is permitted, e.g. where houses and planned communities? So that's a great question. We are starting to see some changes in zoning. And I think it's also interesting that sometimes the way we see states use some of their FEMA dollars is they will go in and buy up properties that, have repeatedly flooded, and then basically what they do is demolish those properties and then they rezone it so that no one else can build in that location. So that's definitely something we're starting to see more of. And I think it's going to be interesting is if the federal government kind of steps up their mitigation spending, which we're anticipating, I think it's going to be interesting to see how states decide to spend those dollars. So any other questions? Those were all great questions. And yeah, I think it just goes to, speaks to the variety of topics that we kind of cover in the environment program. Okay, well, seeing no more questions, again, thank you all so much for taking the time to attend the session today. We definitely look forward to working with all of you, and we hope to actually meet you in person, hopefully sooner rather than later. So thanks again.